The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the suburban street as four kids rode their bikes down the quiet neighborhood lane. The hum of tires against pavement and the occasional burst of laughter filled the air, a welcome distraction from the mundane routine of school and chores. There was something liberating about the moment, the wind whipping through their hair, the freedom of just being kids, untethered and carefree. Ethan, the leader of the group, took the lead on his battered red BMX, leaning into the curve of the road. Behind him, his friends, Jake, Leo, and Sam, followed, the sound of their bikes growing louder as they raced to keep up. It was a perfect afternoon, the kind that made even the most ordinary day feel like an adventure. The neighborhood, a patchwork of neatly manicured lawns and cozy, boxy houses, was their playground. They had spent countless hours riding these streets, but today felt different, almost magical. That's when she appeared. From behind the row of bushes, the woman emerged like a storm. Tall, with a sharp jawline and an air of superiority, she was immediately recognizable. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Karen, the self-appointed guardian of peace and order. To most, she was a figure of whispered annoyance, a woman whose complaints about the slightest disturbance were legendary. But today, she was something else, an obstacle. "Hey, you kids, stop!" Karen's voice sliced through the laughter, harsh and demanding. Her words hung in the air like a slap, freezing the group in place. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had seen Karen before, of course, but never like this close, this angry. The group of friends slowed, unsure of what to make of her. They had been speeding down the street, sure, but they hadn't broken any laws. In fact, they hadn't been doing anything wrong at all. Karen, though, was already marching toward them, her expression hardening with each step. "You think you can just tear through the neighborhood without a care in the world?" Karen's voice was shrill, laced with indignation. "What if one of you hits someone? Or worse, what if you hit a car?" Ethan opened his mouth to respond, his voice shaking slightly, with the adrenaline of the moment. "We're just riding our bikes. I don't want to hear it," Karen snapped, cutting him off. "You kids think you own the place, don't you? You think you can do whatever you want without consequences." Her eyes narrowed, her gaze piercing. "I'm calling the cops. You're a danger to the neighborhood." Saturthiyantu. Words hung in the air like a storm cloud, threatening to burst. Ethan's stomach twisted into knots. The kids exchanged confused glances. The situation escalated quickly. There was no reasoning with Karen, no calming her down. She was set on her course. "Are you serious?" Jake muttered under his breath, his voice a mix of disbelief and anger. "We're just riding bikes, for God's sake." Karen didn't respond to Jake. Instead, she fished her phone out of her pocket and started dialing, her fingers tapping the screen with unnerving precision. Ethan could hear the sound of each digit being punched, each moment dragging on longer than the last. "Hello? Yes. I need to report some dangerous kids riding their bikes down the street. They're reckless, they're speeding, and they're disturbing the peace." Karen's voice was smooth now, almost rehearsed. She was playing her part with chilling confidence. Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to argue, to tell Karen that they were just kids, just having fun. But something about her demeanor, so certain, so unshakable, made him hesitate. Instead, he just stood there, dumbfounded, watching as Karen's plan unfolded. The sirens, faint at first, began to wail in the distance. They were coming. "Don't do this," Leo said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. He was always the more sensitive one, and this situation had clearly rattled him. "We're just having fun. It's not like we're hurting anyone. Karen's cold eyes flicked toward him. You all need to learn some respect. You're ruining this neighborhood. And if you can't understand that, maybe the police will get it. Through your thick skulls. The sirens grew louder, and the kids' faces drained of color. The neighborhood that had once felt like a safe haven, a place where they could be themselves, now felt foreign and threatening. Ethan's thoughts raced as he glanced at his friends. What was happening? Why was she doing this? His mind struggled to wrap around the idea that something as innocent as riding bikes could lead to a confrontation like this. A police car rounded the corner, its lights flashing as it pulled to a stop right in front of them. The officer behind the wheel, a burly man with a thick mustache, stepped out and surveyed the scene. Karen, now standing with her arms crossed, nodded in the officer's direction, her expression a mixture of satisfaction and smug superiority. "This is the one," Karen said, pointing a finger at Ethan. "This kid was the worst. He was speeding down the street like he owned the place." The officer glanced at Ethan, his brow furrowing. "Is that true, kid?" Ethan's throat went dry. He could feel the weight of the officer's gaze, the expectations mounting. He swallowed hard, trying to find his voice. "We were just riding bikes. We didn't mean to cause any trouble." The officer gave a slow, deliberate nod, but his tone wasn't friendly. "You need to be more careful. There are families in this neighborhood, and we don't tolerate reckless behavior. Next time, you could get someone hurt." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He wasn't guilty of anything, yet here he was, being scolded by a stranger for simply being a kid. As the officer turned to leave, Karen gave one last victorious smile, a smirk of self-satisfaction. Ethan stood frozen in place, his mind whirling with frustration and confusion. How had it come to this? How had something so small, just a group of kids riding bikes, spiraled into a public confrontation? The police car pulled away, the distant hum of the sirens gradually fading as it disappeared down the street. The neighborhood felt silent now, like the calm after a storm. But there was no peace, only an unsettling sense of injustice. Ethan looked at his friends. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. They all felt the same, humiliated, defeated, and bitterly angry. But in that moment, one thought settled firmly in Ethan's mind. This wasn't over. Karen had started something, and he wasn't going to let her win. The next few days felt like a quiet storm brewing. Ethan couldn't shake the image of Karen's smug face, her finger pointing at him like he was some kind of criminal. The whole neighborhood had been talking about it, and now, every time he rode his bike down the street, he couldn't help but feel eyes on him, eyes that were judging, questioning. Ethan hated it. He tried to push it out of his mind. After all, it was just one incident, right? Just one Karen making a big deal out of nothing. But every time he passed her house, she was there, watching from her porch with that piercing gaze. He could feel her eyes tracking his every move, like a hawk waiting for its prey to make a wrong turn. Ethan wasn't the only one feeling the pressure. Jake, who had always been the loud one of the group, seemed quieter these days, his usual jokes and sarcastic comments absent. Sam, who had a way of brushing off anything that bothered him, wasn't riding his bike as much anymore. Leo, the sensitive one, was the hardest hit. He avoided the street altogether, preferring to stay inside and play video games. The fun was gone. The carefree days of summer had turned into something far less enjoyable. It was during one of their rare meetings in the park, sitting on a bench that overlooked the street, that Ethan realized how much this was weighing on them all. The group had gathered after school, all of them just trying to feel normal again. But the silence between them spoke louder than words. Jake broke it first. Man, I don't get it. We were just riding our bikes. Why is she making such a big deal out of it? Ethan looked down at his shoes, scuffing the dirt beneath him. I don't know. Maybe she just likes to control things. Control? Leo repeated, his voice bitter. She's a tyrant, man. A tyrant in yoga pants. She's got a problem with everything. Yeah, Sam chimed in, his arms crossed. I mean, she's the one who called the cops on us, for no reason. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. The anger was still there, simmering just beneath the surface. He hated that feeling, hated the idea that Karen had won. He didn't want to be the one who felt defeated. He didn't want his friends to feel defeated. They needed a way out of this, a way to make it right. You know what? Ethan said, his voice steady now. This isn't over. I'm not letting her get away with this. His friends looked at him, eyes wide with surprise. Jake raised an eyebrow. What are you talking about? I don't know yet, Ethan admitted. But we're not going to just sit here and take it. She thinks she can bully us into hiding? No way. For the first time in days, a flicker of hope sparked in his friend's eyes. You got a plan? Sam asked. Leaning forward, Ethan didn't have a concrete plan yet, but something inside him clicked. He wasn't just going to roll over and accept it. There had to be a way to make Karen realize that she couldn't just push people around. He had to make her pay for what she had done, but not in the way she expected. He had to hit her where it hurt. It started with something small, just a few observations. Ethan began paying attention to Karen more closely. He noticed how she acted, what she did, where she went. He saw her out in the front yard every morning, obsessively trimming her hedges or sweeping her porch, all while eyeing the neighbors, as if they were on trial. He noticed how she would lecture anyone who dared to make even the slightest noise, from the neighbors mowing their lawns to kids playing basketball down the block. Ethan's gut twisted each time he saw her, but something else burned inside him, a determination to make her feel as powerless as she had made him feel. For the next few days, Ethan and his friends began watching Karen from a distance, not just with eyes full of resentment, but with a keen, almost tactical focus. They noticed the little things, the way Karen's power seemed to come from her ability to make others feel small. It wasn't just that she called the cops, it was that she had the whole neighborhood wrapped around her finger. The other neighbors were afraid to stand up to her, preferring to avoid conflict rather than risk her wrath. One afternoon, as Ethan was riding his bike past her house, slower than usual, just to keep an eye on her, he saw it. Karen was on her porch, talking to a neighbor, her voice rising in that familiar tone of superiority. Ethan didn't need to hear the words to know she was complaining about something trivial, making the situation bigger than it was. The neighbor, a man in his late 40s who had lived in the neighborhood for years, looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Ethan paused and glanced back toward the street. He could see the man shaking his head, his body language tense, clearly trying to appease Karen rather than confront her. But Karen wasn't done. Her voice was sharp, and the air around her seemed to crackle with irritation. She was demanding something, likely a public apology, or some sort of reparation for the incident, though Ethan couldn't hear the details. Something inside Ethan snapped. He wasn't going to let her keep using people like this. He wasn't going to let her bully the entire neighborhood into submission. He didn't need to confront her directly. Not yet. But he did need to find a way to turn her weapon back on her. That evening, he sat down in front of his computer, a feeling of determination settling over him. He had an idea, one that would take patience. But it could work. It was time to use her arrogance against her. If Karen wanted to play the role of the neighborhood watchdog, then Ethan would give her something to really watch. Over the next few days, he set his plan in motion, starting with small but calculated moves. He created an anonymous social media account under a name that was familiar to everyone in the neighborhood, but no one would immediately recognize as him. Slowly, carefully, he started to post. It wasn't anything dramatic at first, just a few innocuous comments about how the neighborhood had been a lot quieter lately, how everyone was tiptoeing around. It was a subtle nudge at Karen, a reminder that everyone was afraid to do anything because of her. Then he posted a video, a short clip of a neighbor, the same man Karen had been lecturing earlier, nodding awkwardly and trying to get away from her on the porch. It wasn't malicious, but it was enough. The post was short, with a simple caption. Just another day in paradise, right? The video quickly gained traction. Ethan sat back and watched as the first ripple of the tide began to form. It was only the beginning, and Karen wouldn't see it coming. By the end of the week, Ethan's anonymous account, subtly named Maple Watch, had become the talk of the neighborhood. What started as a few playful posts had turned into something bigger. The short clips, screenshots of text threads, and humorous memes mocking overbearing neighborhood surveillance had struck a nerve. The tone was always careful, never cruel, never direct. But anyone who lived on Maple Drive knew exactly who the posts were referring to. Karen, the comments rolled in. At first it was curiosity, the kind neighbors whisper about during morning jogs or while trimming hedges. Then came the quiet agreement. Wow, someone finally said it, one user commented. She yelled at my kid for playing tag, another wrote. Karen's been doing this for years. It wasn't long before stories began surfacing, little injustices buried by silence and fear of confrontation. Now, with someone giving the community a voice, the floodgates had opened. Ethan didn't expect the account to blow up the way it did, but he wasn't surprised. He'd seen how Karen operated, bullying with a smile, manipulating situations to suit her narrative, always pretending she was doing it for the good of the community. But now her pristine image was beginning to crack. And the best part? She had no idea who was behind it. Karen's behavior shifted. At first, she was defiant. She scoffed at the mention of the account during one of her HOA committee meetings, dismissing it as juvenile nonsense spread by people with no sense of responsibility. But as more neighbors began to stand up, emboldened by the support of the anonymous page, something in her changed. She became agitated. Her interactions with others grew sharper. She argued with the mailman over packages being delivered too loudly. She snapped at the local dog walker for letting a golden retriever pee on the grass near her sidewalk. People started keeping their distance. Karen, once feared for her loud voice and unshakable self-assurance, was being left to stew in her own paranoia. Ethan watched it unfold from a distance. He still rode his bike down Maple Drive, but now he did it with calm defiance. Karen would glare at him, but she said nothing. She was too busy trying to figure out who had started the campaign that was slowly unraveling her social grip on the neighborhood. Then came the break. One morning, a new post appeared on Maple Watch. It was a 10-second video, clearly taken from a Ring doorbell. Karen was seen pacing outside someone's home, shouting through the screen door about noise violations and threatening to call the police because the family's teenage daughter had hosted a birthday party with music that went past 8 p.m. The video had been sent anonymously to the account. Ethan hadn't even known it existed until it showed up in his inbox. He hesitated for a moment before posting it. The video was more incriminating than anything he'd shared so far. It wasn't just passive-aggressive Karen, it was Karen at her most entitled and unreasonable. But when he read the message attached, "She's been doing this to everyone. Thank you for standing up to her." He knew it was time. The video went viral. Not just in the neighborhood, but beyond. Someone shared it on a local subreddit. Then it made its way to Facebook. Within 24 hours, it had tens of thousands of views, and the comments were brutal. People didn't just mock Karen, they dissected her behavior, pointing out every red flag, every manipulative phrase. And then, finally, came the media. A local news station, always hungry for feel-good or scandalous human interest pieces, reached out to the anonymous Maple Watch account. They wanted to do a segment on suburban surveillance and community accountability. Ethan didn't respond to the request directly, but he crafted a carefully worded post explaining the purpose of the page and urging people to look out for one another, not in fear, but with kindness. Karen, meanwhile, was spiraling. Her once daily strolls down the street had vanished. She no longer stood guard on her porch. The tidy perfection of her front lawn began to slip. The hedges remained, untrimmed for days, then weeks. The woman who had prided herself on control was unraveling, undone by a camera, a few clicks, and the truth. But Karen wasn't done fighting. Late one afternoon, Ethan and his friends were sitting under the old oak tree in the park, swapping stories, and laughing again, something they hadn't done freely since the incident. That's when a sleek black SUV pulled up at the curb. Out stepped Karen, holding a folder and wearing dark sunglasses. She looked more composed than before, but there was a tightness to her face that didn't match the calm she tried to project. She marched toward the boys. "Ethan," she said coolly. "A word?" The laughter died instantly. Ethan stood up slowly, his heart thudding in his chest. He met her gaze, but didn't speak. Karen didn't wait. "I know what you've been doing. You think you're clever, hiding behind a keyboard and stirring up trouble. But I have contacts. I've spoken to a lawyer. What you're doing is defamation. You can be sued." Ethan didn't flinch. He wasn't surprised she'd try this route. He had done his research. Everything he'd posted had been carefully curated. No names, no direct accusations, just public clips and community stories. "I haven't broken any laws," he said quietly. "And I'm not hiding. I'm just showing people what's already been happening." Karen's lips curled slightly, but the mask was slipping. "You're a child. You don't know what you're getting into." "Maybe," Ethan replied. "But I know enough to stand up to someone who's been bullying people for years." The two stood in silence for a moment, the air between them heavy. Karen's eyes darted, just for a second, as if searching for an escape. She wasn't used to being challenged, not like this, not by a kid. Finally, she turned on her heel and stormed back to her car. The SUV peeled away, leaving only dust in its wake. Jake let out a low whistle. "Dude, you just stared down the dragon." Ethan exhaled slowly, the adrenaline finally catching up to him. He didn't feel triumphant, not yet, but he knew one thing for sure. Karen was on the ropes, and the final round hadn't even begun. The storm broke just 3 days later. It began with a shriek so loud it startled half the street. Neighbors poked their heads out of front doors, curtains rustled, and every porch light flickered to life like stage lights before a final act. At the center of the chaos was Karen, arms flailing, voice hoarse, pacing her porch like a woman possessed. Her freshly delivered HOA citation hung limply in one hand. In the other, a phone clutched so tightly it might crack. Ethan watched from across the street, seated casually on his friend Jake's front steps, pretending to scroll through his phone while his heart beat like a war drum. His plan hadn't just worked, it had ignited. The Homeowners Association, spurred by mounting complaints and public pressure after the viral video and social media backlash, had finally acted. The citation, written in stiff legal language, cited Karen for multiple violations: harassment, misuse of HOA authority, and creating a hostile environment within the community. Attached was a mandatory summons to the next board meeting, which, due to public interest, would be held in the community center and open to residents. Karen's empire was collapsing, and everyone had a front-row seat. The night of the meeting, Ethan and his friends arrived early. The room buzzed with nervous energy. Neighbors shifting in chairs, whispering behind hands, unsure what to expect. Some were here for justice, others for drama. A few for the sheer satisfaction of seeing the woman who had terrorized them finally face accountability. Karen entered last. She wore her signature white blouse, hair pulled tightly back into a bun that looked like it was resisting the urge to unravel. Her expression was tight, but her eyes betrayed her, darting nervously around the room, seeking familiar faces, allies that had all but vanished. The board called the meeting to order, but the usual routine was quickly set aside. This wasn't about landscaping or recycling schedules. This was a reckoning. One by one, neighbors stood and spoke. A middle-aged woman described how Karen had accused her grandchildren of vandalism because they had sidewalk chalk drawings near her driveway. A young couple told of how they'd been threatened with noise complaints after a quiet barbecue. The man with the golden retriever spoke next, voice shaking, recalling the day Karen had screamed at him so loudly the dog whimpered and pulled away. Each story painted the same portrait: a woman obsessed with control, who wielded fear like a scepter and silence like a throne. Karen tried to defend herself. She stood, stiff and indignant, rattling off half-remembered bylaws and imagined offenses. Her voice grew shriller with each denial, each excuse, each moment she realized no one was defending her. Then the board president, an older man with kind eyes and a weary voice, asked, "Karen, have you ever considered that you're the common denominator in all these complaints?" The room fell silent. Karen blinked. I was just enforcing rules. The neighborhood, this neighborhood, has standards. And if no one else will uphold them, No, the president interrupted gently. You've been enforcing fear, not rules. There was no dramatic gavel slam, no yelling, just silence, thicker than cement, and the creak of Karen lowering herself into her chair as her breath caught. The board didn't vote to remove her from the HOA that night. They didn't need to. Karen resigned before the meeting was even over, leaving the form half-filled and forgotten on the desk as she marched out the door, her heels echoing like the last stubborn beats of a dying drum. But the final blow wasn't hers to control. The following morning, Ethan uploaded one last video to the Maple Watch account. It was a carefully edited montage, clips from Karen's outbursts, paired with statements from neighbors, voices disguised, faces blurred, ending with footage from the meeting, her unraveling, her resignation. It was powerful, not mean-spirited, not petty, just honest. The caption read, "Accountability isn't about revenge. It's about reminding people that their actions matter, even here, even now, especially when no one's watching." The video exploded. Local news picked it up again. A national Fortorhisi blog ran a feature on the neighborhood that took down a Karen. Think pieces debated the morality of public accountability and the power of anonymous activism. But none of that mattered to Ethan. What mattered was this: the neighborhood had changed. Kids played in the cul-de-sac again. Bikes raced freely. Porch lights flickered with laughter and conversation, not judgment. Karen's house sat quieter now. The blinds remained drawn. The yard, once obsessively curated, grew wilder by the week. Ethan didn't feel proud. He felt resolved. He hadn't set out to humiliate her. He just wanted her to stop hurting people. And now, finally, she had. Jake clapped a hand on his shoulder as they watched Leo teach Sam how to pop a wheelie near the mailbox. You know, I never thought I'd say this, but your plan? Kinda genius, Ethan smirked. Told you I wasn't just wasting time online. Dude, you organized a neighborhood-wide rebellion. You're basically a folk hero now, he laughed. But in truth, he felt older. Not in a bad way, just different, wiser, more grounded. He had stood up, not just for himself, but for everyone who'd been made to feel small, and it had made all the difference. As the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long, golden shadows across Maple Drive, Ethan hopped onto his bike. He didn't look at Karen's house as he passed. He didn't need to. Some victories don't need to be shouted. Some stories don't need a villain's final words. Sometimes the silence is the ending. And this time, it belonged to him.